west bank of the river, 35,000 soldiers, massive army, it's been 8 years for this dirty, glittering, ragged, glorious army. 8 years of victory, 8 years of glory, 8 years of blood, 8 years of disease, 8 years since they've been home. And they want to go back home. A young man steps before this army and delivers a speech that changes the world. Alexander the Great had to give this speech to keep his dissenting army together. In this speech, he talks about the glory of their past, the glory of the future, the lack of glory if they turn back, and the danger if they don't solidify their conquests. Alexander the Great was born in 356 BC in Pella, Macedonia. He was from ages 13 to 16. He was taught by Aristotle. His father, King Philip, was a warring king. So what this meant was that when Alexander was age 16, King Philip left on a war campaign, leaving Alexander in charge of Macedonia. And as a young boy, he wanted to prove himself. So he attacked the Mede and won. And then at age 20, his father was assassinated, and he used the support of the army to kill all of his political opponents. When and where? In 326 BCE, they had just marched to the Ephasus River, and it's now known as the Beas River at the edge of India. The purpose of the speech, his soldiers wanted to go back home, and because they were exhausted, they had just marched through the Hindu Kush, which is, if you know anything about modern warfare, that's where the Taliban is, and we've been fighting for a long time trying to get them out, and we can't. So that was really exhausting. And they had just fought King Porus at the Hydaspes River, about 30 miles to the west, which, that's a picture of the battle. It's kind of brutal. That was the highest casualty rate as of yet. And Alexander wanted to capture all of India, which would have increased his empire by half, which is kind of ridiculous. I honestly side with the soldiers on this. But all in all, his speech was mostly just his part in the debate between him and his soldiers over the army's future. So the significance, this speech held the army together, preventing premature collapse of Alexander's empire, which is important because his empire was very conducive to trade. As you can see, it is a massive empire. What this means is that from India to Europe, things could travel in a matter of weeks. If after his death, when it collapsed into a 40-year period of war, that would have taken months, possibly years, to travel. So it's impossible to say what was traded in the last 3 years of Alexander's reign, which is how long it took from this speech to when he died, but it is 23% of his empire's lifespan. So what could have gone through then could mean that we don't have our phones, we don't have our technology, because a lot of our technology came from the Middle East. So from here on out, on the rest of my speech, most of it is just speculation, because from the sounds of his speech, he just stepped up there, started talking, so nobody really knows.
History. We have journeyed farther than any mortal men before us, conquering lands that were once thought unreachable. Our empire stretches from Greece to the edges of India, and we have stood as masters of the known world. But today, my brothers, we are faced with a choice that will determine the course of history, the legacy of our names, and the destiny of our empire. We stand at the eastern edge of this vast subcontinent, and beyond these waters lie unknown lands, untold riches, and uncharted adventures. Shall we turn back now, with the taste of victory still fresh upon our lips, or shall we march onward into the unknown? History. We have journeyed farther than any mortal men.
Some rhetorical devices. First is antithesis, which when he asks, like, is it your advice that we turn back or my advice that we go forward? In this, he is saying that he values his soldiers' opinion and that they matter to him, which is probably the most important part, because if he said that we're going forward without your advice, his entire army would have mutinied. The second is an expletive, and when he inserts your commander into it, what he's saying is that although I have a better position than you, even though I'm greater than you, all that, I'm still there with you. I'm still sharing this exhaustion and danger. And then the third one is hypophora, and he first asks, like, who's going to resist? And then he says, nobody has resisted. Nobody's going to resist, with the single exception of King Porus that we just defeated. And then for Ethos, Pathos, and Logos, so for Ethos, he would have been in the same condition as the army. He had just traveled through the Hindu Kush. He was just injured in the battle against King Porus. So his soldiers would have recognized that he is sharing everything with them. And then he would have also been dressed as a king. He would have had nicer armor. He would have been like in slightly better condition. And in this time, kings were looked up to. Kings were looked up to for about another 2,000 years. And for Pathos, he talks about the glory of the past first, and then he speculates about the potential glory in the future, and how, like, if we've had all this glory so far, why wouldn't we have future glory? And we've already gone farther than Hercules, and he named several other famous, like, Greek gods or whatever. For Logos, he mentions the many victories they've had in the past. In one paragraph that takes up almost an entire page in his 2-page speech is just listing victory after victory after victory. And then he asks, after that, like, if we've had all these victories, why wouldn't we have more? And then he also reminds the soldiers of the many civilizations that are around them that could incite rebellion and destroy all the work that they've been doing for the past 8 years. So why will it endure? Well, first of all, it very well can change the course of history, like I mentioned before, because a lot of trade happened in his empire. And then, even if it didn't change history, it should still endure, because it was a very good speech. It was really short, but it still convinced thousands of soldiers to stick with him, even if it was for less than what he wanted, because he wanted to take over all of Asia, was his final goal, but he wound up having his soldiers just solidify his empire. So, thank you for listening to my speech.
Time? 8:07.
Practice, I was up like